Thank you for that, Olivia. If you have the Bibles this morning, please turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 1. As just a portion of that was read at the beginning of the service, and it's one of those portions of Scripture where it's hard to find much positive to start off with a portion of Scripture, although there are positive elements in the book of Ecclesiastes. The danger I have with some of these series as we go through the books of the Bible is sometimes I feel like I need to go back and repeat what I've taught on previously so you're up to speed, and I can't do that because we'll be bogged down for quite a long time. And so if you did not hear the first introductory message, it might be good for you to go back and listen to that so you catch up to where we're at. But let me just make a couple comments here. The book of Ecclesiastes, I believe the writer of Ecclesiastes is Solomon, the king, and we gave several proofs for that last week, and there's more that I did not bring up. But knowing that, we also made reference to the fact that this is probably written about 4 years prior to his death. And so you can imagine a 40-year reign of King Solomon. 4 years prior to his death, he writes the book of Ecclesiastes. So this is the summation of what he's learned as the wisest man who walked the face of the earth. We know that when God asked him, Solomon asked, "What you want, and I will give it you," he requested wisdom or knowledge of how to lead his people. And God said, "Because you've asked this, we've also given you great wealth." And he not only was known as the wisest man in the world at that time, but also the richest man in the world. And his kingdom was absolutely fascinating. And much studies have been done on this, but it is a fascinating thing when you consider the wealth and the wisdom of this king. Yet, with all that wisdom, the book of Ecclesiastes shows us the danger for all of us. And I mean this sincerely. Many times I thought as I read about and studied about Bible characters, I would look at them as kind of heroes of the faith, and I look at them, even with their sinfulness and whatnot, I would look at them and I didn't want to question them. But when you read the book of Ecclesiastes, when you understand the history of Solomon, when you look at the book of Proverbs, Song of Solomon, you realize his wisdom was amazing because it was a gift from God. He also gained more insight and more wisdom, but then he had a problem with his heart. And like most of us, we have a problem with our heart. And there are times, and I think you and I would say this, Pastor, there's times when I'm just so excited about my walk with God. I'm so excited to read my Bible. I'm so excited to go to church. I'm so excited to fellowship with other Christians. And there's other times you just say, you know what? I'm just done. I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want to get up and read my Bible. I don't want to pray. I don't want to witness. I wish there was no responsibilities on me spiritually. I won't dare ask for a raise of hands of who would join me in that, but I'm sure with some of the smiles, we've all been there at times. We're just like, if this is what it's all about, I'm done. And it could be hurts through church. It could be hurts through family. It could be hurts from employment. It could be hurts just in different areas. And our heart, we understand our heart is desperately wicked. As much as we would say, well, I'm saved, I'm now righteous in the eyes of God. Yes, but you still struggle with the fleshly desires of this heart, as did Solomon. And the greatest lesson we can learn is here's a man endued with all wisdom or great wisdom that God would give him, and yet he still lost his heart in the process. This should be such a lesson to all of us, especially younger people. And I would say just especially because you're coming up, hopefully still in innocence, with so many things out there that you don't need to know about. The curiosity gets the best of us, as it did for Solomon. And he rationalized, and as my study, I look at this, he rationalized, he made excuses for himself to do things he otherwise knew he was not supposed to do. But because of his position, because of his great wealth and his power, he actually went further than what God ever wanted him to go in his experiences and his knowledge about certain things. There are some things, folks, you just understand, we don't need to have that kind of wisdom. There's worldly wisdom we just don't need. And yet Solomon didn't shut that part off. And so I say that as we just need to catch up with where we're at in the book of Ecclesiastes. So just a few years before Solomon passes on, a few years before his kingdom would be divided because of his behavior. There's so much behind this. And so let me just jump into my introduction so I do not keep rambling on with some other facts and figures here. So the search for meaning of life. And this is the title of this message and tonight's message, part 2. Which really covers chapters 1 and 2, but today we'll just deal with chapter number 1. But the search for meaning of life is a generational curse. I say that because what we see from Solomon, he views it as a negative. He views it as something that's just empty, it's meaningless, it's futile. But those who do not know God and do not walk closely with God, so there's two parts of this. To know God is one thing, and I mean know God as your personal Savior. Know Jesus Christ, your personal Savior, but then to walk with Him. I'll be honest with you, in all my years of ministry, the most depressed, more than unsaved people, I've seen Christians more depressed sometimes than unsaved people. And there's a reason for that. God wants to, and He tells you He'll give you joy if you walk closely with Him. So the problem's not God's problem in the sense that it's His fault. The Bible tells us if we walk in the Spirit, one of the fruits of the Spirit is joy and peace. And this is where a lot of Christians, they claim to be so spiritual, but they're this roller coaster of emotions, up and down, up and down, up and down. It's like, wow, get a grip here, folks. Walk with God. He's the one that produces joy. And so we find that the generational curse of people seeking after fulfillment in this life or the meaning of life, people who have no direction are cursed with the notion they must find an answer to life's meaning and purpose. Why do you suppose that all humans at some point in their life will look for meaning or for purpose? I believe the Scripture contains the answer to the question of life's meaning and purpose. I also believe that Solomon did what most people would do with the money, power, and access that he had as king in his search for meaning and fulfillment. Unless they have an understanding of life's meaning and purpose, we would go the same route as Solomon would go if we were blessed with the kind of wisdom and power and money. Solomon's quest to find pleasure and answers turned his heart from true fulfillment, and he opened the abyss of self-gratification, resulting in emptiness and sorrow. And I can tell you, as a pastor for many, many years, this is where most people end up after they've gone out and done everything that the world told them was fun, everything their hearts desire. They come back, sometimes never come back, but the end result of their testimony is, what a waste of my life. What a waste. I led a man to Christ a number of years ago now that wasted $3 million, and he said, I don't even know what I wasted it on. Don't even know what I wasted it on. Parties, girls, cars, you name it. He said, I just wasted it. He goes, I have nothing to account for it. Nothing. He said, it's just gone. And this story can be told over and over and over and over. Not just with the wealthy, but even with us who aren't that wealthy, who just waste so much time and effort on things that are so temporal, so temporary in bringing satisfaction. And so what we find then is those who search for the meaning of life. Let me just give you a few definitions to kind of help you with this. The idea of meaning refers to one's significance in life. One's significance in life. There's a general meaning of life for all. This, in the sense of a significance. If somebody asks you, what is the meaning of life to you? What is the meaning of life to you? And I'm not asking you to answer out loud, but just think about it. There was a gentleman named Viktor Frankl who was an Auschwitz survivor. In 1946, he wrote a book, The Meaning of Life. In it, he gives his 3 sources of fulfillment in life and how he would go about finding meaning in life. One of those was purposeful work. The second was love. And the third was courage in the face of difficulty. And not to doubt a man who definitely lived through the worst of situations and understanding that he came through. And while they were in their prison camp, he said that one of the ways that looking back on it, one of the ways that he survived was imaging in his mind positive things in order to survive. And I've read many different books on different men who have survived different war camps and brutality and people who have even suffered amongst bondage in relationships and different things. And they said that they would go to another place in their brain and try to just think of ways that they could survive. And as sad as that is one way of finding meaning. Now listen, this has nothing to do with the spiritual side of us. And I want you to understand, the book is not written in the sense of being a spiritual God follower. And what we find, though, is even though these tactics may help you survive some very negative environments of negative situations, this is human reason. This is how we as humans, and the danger is for Christians, we're so blending the world's philosophy and Christianity that we're kind of just adapting to what the world says, and we're becoming less and less dependent on God and more dependent on what the world says. So in his book, he identified a purpose in life and to live for it. And that's what brings meaning. Identify a purpose in life and then live for that. The danger there is, what is your purpose? You say, well, my purpose is love. Okay, but that will fail. My purpose is, you name it. Eventually that's going to fail. Sadly, his wife, while a prisoner at the same time, died in that camp with him. They didn't see each other. They were separated. And so we understand that even in our minds, as we image things and try to come up with things to help us to be survivors, they still fall short of true fulfillment. We notice then the word meaning there, as people are searching for meaning, significance of life. Secondly, purpose refers to one's objectives or goals, something to achieve, something to pursue, something to focus on. There is a major purpose and perhaps many minor purposes in our life. And this is true. There's nothing wrong with having a purpose. I tell people, look, you need a purpose in life. And I define that purpose from a Christian perspective. And then I said, if you have a job, if you have a family, if you have this, then these are your other purposes as well. But they should all be guided by the main purpose. And people that do not have a relationship with God don't understand that. And then fulfillment refers to one's satisfaction or contentment. Lasting fulfillment is attainable with a proper understanding and willingness. It is attainable with proper understanding and willingness to go the whole route that it takes to achieve that. So we'll compare some of these ideas from God's perspective and man's perspective, as Solomon writes here in the book of Ecclesiastes. But the top questions that man asks himself are, what is the meaning of life? What is my purpose here on earth? And what brings lasting fulfillment? In the bookstore, I think it is, we have this little booklet. I think it's like a 6x9 booklet, and I leave them sometimes at hospitals, and it has I think it says 7 questions of life. And it talks about people going through hardships and trials, but it's a gospel message, but it takes different illness and financial reversal, all these different things, but it gives the gospel in a very creative way in order to bring people to the sense that without a true understanding of God, there is no hope in this life. And it's important that we as Christians understand this. We need to understand, how do we ourselves find fulfillment in this life, but then how do we also teach others they can find fulfillment in this life? And so the top 3 questions again, what is the meaning of life? What is my purpose here on earth? And what brings lasting fulfillment? So let's look now at Ecclesiastes chapter 1, and skip down to verse number 3. What profit hath a man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun? I want you to notice right off the bat, this is a question, but he's getting ready to go into really a negative commentary about there really is no profit. He's asking this question. He's the preacher, as it mentions up here in verse number 1. This is Solomon. Remember, the word preacher, Ecclesiastes, both come from the Hebrew word kohelet, has an idea of someone speaking to an assembly. So we have Solomon, no doubt, as the king. He would speak at times to assembly, and people would come and just want to hear him teach on different subjects. Again, he gained great knowledge and great wisdom. There wasn't a topic he did not know something about. Amazing. I've met a few people in my lifetime that you could just ask them about certain topics, and they would just start talking. You're just like, oh my goodness, how do you know this information? And they were just a well-studied, a well-versed person that had an intellectual mind that could retain that knowledge. For me, as soon as I preach this message, you ask me about it later on, I have no idea what I just preached. Get my notes, all right? I have no idea. I'm a very simple person. God has given me the ability to just do enough to get by, and I'm thankful that he uses me, but at the same time, my brain capacity is not that large. And so we appreciate people that are like that, but sometimes I marvel at people that are so skilled in certain areas or can have a knowledge in many other areas. Like, wow, God, someday I want to have that kind of brain, but I don't. So I digress. Let's move on. So here we have the preacher. So number 1, the search for meaning in the circle of life, the cycle of life, verses 3 through 11. What profit hath a man in his labor which he taketh under the sun? Verse number 4, one generation passeth away, and another generation cometh. But the earth abideth forever. The sun also ariseth, and the sun goeth down, and hasteth to his place where he arose. The wind goeth toward the south, and turneth about unto the north, and it whirleth about continually. And the wind returneth once again to his circuits. That's where we get that word cycle. We know that especially those of us who live here in New England, we have 4 distinct seasons. We have winter, spring, summer, and fall. And they are pretty distinct as far as the different climates or the different types of temperature changes. I mean, you never know. We could have 60 degrees one day and then a foot of snow the next day. That just happens here from time to time. But it's pretty significant. And the cycle just doesn't change. It keeps going, and it keeps going, and it keeps going, and it keeps coming. And over the thousands of years that the earth has been in existence, this has just been the same, going on and going on and going on. Solomon looks at it as a man later in age, a man who has gained great wisdom, and he's looking at all the totality of the wisdom and the knowledge that he has gained, and he's just looking at this futile cycle of it just keeps going around and going around. It doesn't stop. It doesn't wait because this thing happened. It doesn't wait because this person passed away. It doesn't wait because this child was born. It doesn't wait. He's just looking at it all and saying, it just keeps going. It just doesn't stop. And it's turned his heart in a sense. He's expressing it one way in a truth that I think on the positive side, what we can learn as students of Solomon right now is, okay, he's teaching us something that we need to recognize. Now, most of us say, yeah, well, we get this, Pastor. This is simple. I know that. But sometimes spiritually we don't understand that life's going to continue to go on. No matter what you face, no matter what I face, life is going to keep marching on. This is something that as a pastor, being at the bedside of people who have just had babies, and at the bedside of people who have just lost a loved one, it gives me perspective. And sometimes the same exact day, I'm at the hospital for a birth, and I'm at the hospital for a death, and just sometimes sit there and say, okay, Lord, it teaches me so much about this life. Just the reality, the fact of the matter is, we're going to die someday. Life is going to pass, and then it'll keep going. And we want it to keep going until the Lord returns. We want to keep being filled with His purpose. And we'll get to the purpose here later on in the message. But we understand here, first of all, in this search for meaning in the cycle of life, Solomon was teaching us that life keeps marching on. It keeps going, and everything in nature has its course. And he asked the question, what profit hath man in all his labor? Verse number 4, the continuous cycle of life and death, day and night, year after year. Man, I think, is wired to expect more out of this life. He's wired to think that there's got to be something more coming, and that's important because there is. It's important for us to acknowledge and understand that there is more than just this life. And I think if that's even one lesson that whether or not Solomon was trying to express here in this passage, it's something that we can understand as Christians. There is something more to expect. But in this life, that march just keeps going on and going on and going on. Verse number 8, notice what it says here. All things are full of what? Labor. And man cannot utter it. Now, it's kind of interesting. When I was out in Southern California, I pastored out there for a number of years, and 4 of our boys were born out there and worked on the church facility there, worked at my own house. But, it was so nice in Southern California when we would put a fence post in the ground. Man, that was the easiest digging I ever did in my life. I grew up part of my life on a farm up in Killeen, Connecticut. Every time you stuck a shovel in the ground, you hit a rock. I mean, it wasn't John, go get the shovel, John, go get the pickaxe, John, go get the crowbar. I mean, you just knew as soon as you started digging, you were hitting rock. That's why you have so many rock walls. And, the ledge that we have here all around us and underground, you don't even see it. It's just tons and tons of rock around us. California was sand. I mean, it was once swampland, and they just covered it over with sand, and they started building houses on it. It was so easy to dig out there, and it was wonderful. But we talk about everything requiring labor. And it seems to be that way sometimes. Like, man, it just seems 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Just seems to be that's life. And Solomon saw that even though he was rich, even though he paid to have cities built, even though he took over hundreds of different places and built cities for different things, built temples and on, he still saw there was labor. And once he got one project done, guess what? They were repairing the first part of that project. That's just life. That's the way it goes. And he's talking about this toil, never-ending toil of life. And he's expressing that the cycles of life just keep going on and keep going on. But notice in verse number 8 again, all things are full of labor. Man cannot utter it. The eye is what? Not satisfied. And this is such a true statement about us as humans. We're just never truly satisfied. Now, let me make a statement here. We're never satisfied in the flesh. We're never satisfied in what we think, apart from spiritual thinking, what we think should be done or what could be done. And so we notice that he says here, the eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. Verse 9, the thing that hath been, it is that which shall be. The thing which is done, it is that which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun. And this is all in reference to, this is just going to keep going on and on. We're going to have to build. We're going to have to rebuild. We're going to have to plant. We're going to have to replant. We're going to have to, clear this area. We're going to have to re-clear this area. It's just in time, he lived long enough. He saw long enough that it's just going to keep coming back around to this. There was always going to be labor. So he's talking about the monotony of the cycle of life. And what does it do? It leaves one feeling empty, that it just keeps going on. Now listen, he's talking about a man who has seen everything. You're talking about, or he's teaching as a man who has gained more insight and knowledge than any of his people even that are under him. He would travel and he would study, he would investigate, he would look at things, he would, on all different levels, this man had great knowledge and great wisdom. But what was taking place was with that knowledge and with that wisdom, he was also starting to understand that the cycle of life just kept going on, and he was looking at some of the negatives involved with that. And so we see that in his search for the cycle of life that the eye is never satisfied. The eye is never satisfied. Let's read verse number 10 and verse number 11, and then we'll move on to the second point. Is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new? It hath been already of old time, which was before. There is no remembrance of former things, neither shall there be any remembrance of things that are to come with those that shall come after. And so he's talking about, again, one city or something is built, a person comes along and they live their life, and even though we have history about certain people, really, they're forgotten about. That city, whoever was the leaders of there, they're forgotten about. It just keeps going on and going on. So he's just talking about this cycle, that just endless cycle that keeps going, keeps going. Nothing new under the sun. And so he has a negative outlook from what he has been exposed to. Secondly, I want you to notice the search for meaning in human reason. Human reason. And I use the term human reason here because the term wisdom is used by Solomon. He was given wisdom, and he talks about seeking out things in wisdom. But I have to say that this wisdom here is really more human reason than it is wisdom of God. Now, as we define the term wisdom, there are different definitions we can give it, but typically, as we're thinking from a biblical perspective, the wisdom that God gave to Solomon was knowledge, yes, about things, but it was also knowledge to make the right decisions. That was the wisdom that God gave to Solomon, knowledge to make the right decisions. And with that, he was able to seek out and gain more knowledge so he'd have the ability to make right decisions. As I mentioned, if some of you are here during the Wednesday night series, I preached a series on the 7 pillars of wisdom just a week or two back, and then prior to that. But we understand that along with wisdom and these different qualities or characteristics come along with wisdom, discernment is necessary. And discernment is taking that knowledge and taking that wisdom that God has given to you and making the right decision with that information. Not the wrong decision. See, discernment has the idea of taking those principles and saying, okay, I know what I can do and I know what I cannot do. That's discernment, and that all is encompassed in this idea of wisdom. So looking at Solomon's life and what we know about him, he did not truly use that kind of wisdom in his searching to find out about more things. Turn with me, if you would, to 1 Kings chapter number 4. 1 Kings chapter number 4, because I just want you to see this idea of wisdom before I teach you on where Solomon went wrong. 1 Kings chapter number 4 and verse number 29. So we're looking for the second point here, search for meaning in human reason. And I say that from Solomon's perspective. He uses the word wisdom. And if we want to say it's wisdom, I would say it's worldly wisdom or general wisdom, just knowledge about certain things. But notice in 1 Kings chapter 4, I give this as a reference to the wisdom that Solomon did have and the fame of his wisdom that went across the known world at that time. In 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 29, and God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding exceeding much, and largeness of heart, even as the sand that is on the seashore. And Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the children of the east country and all the wisdom of Egypt. Now, those are the places that they had wise men. People would travel to these wise men and they would try to get information. They would ask questions and they would get answers, the philosophers of the day, if you would. Verse 31, for he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman, and Chalcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol, and his fame was in all the nations round about. And he spake 3,000 proverbs. So in Proverbs, we have 31 chapters of Proverbs, and they don't equal 3,000. So there's more and more that Solomon has written that we don't even have record of. It's amazing the mind that this man had. And so it goes on to say, and he wrote, his songs were 1,005 songs. He spake of trees, from the cedar tree of Lebanon, and even unto the hyssop that springeth out of the wall. He spake also of beasts and of fowl and of creeping things and of fishes. Listen, he would be the narrator on National Geographic, all right, or Discovery Channel. I love, what was the Planet Earth? Is that the one that's out right now? They just came out with the new one last night. I wanted to see it, but I was not able to see it. But I love those nature shows. I love them. Keep finding out new creatures and new animals. And they start talking about some of how these animals survive and what they do. And it's just fascinating. And listen, I look at it from a perspective, my God designed this. Not everyone looks at it from that. I look at it from that perspective. This is what my God designed. We're still finding out things. It's amazing what we're finding out. Well, Solomon would have been the one teaching on this and narrating it. In verse number 34, and there came of all people to hear the wisdom of Solomon from all kings of the earth, which had heard of his wisdom. You think Solomon was quite well known and quite wise? Absolutely. And this is where we take a turn, because I want you to notice in verse number 12, here Solomon speaking of himself, I, the preacher, Solomon, the Kohelet, was king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I gave my heart. I'd like to stop you right there, because this is where he goes wrong. When you give your heart away, how many of you have ever heard it? Say it about the person that you love. I gave my heart to that person and they broke it. When you give your heart to something, you have to understand, you're putting yourself out there. And sometimes when we put ourselves out there that way, we stop thinking clearly. We stop using the brain that God gave us or the spirit that God gave us to say, hey, wait a minute. Yeah, that crowd, don't give your heart to that crowd. Don't give your heart to that guy, that gal. Don't give your heart to that person. Don't give your heart to this issue. Why? Because sometimes we start thinking more so like we stop thinking and we just start doing. And this is a danger for all of us. And here Solomon, as the wisest man, one of the downfalls of Solomon, I believe, was that he gave his heart. This is an expression that he gave what was inside of him, this innermost being of him. He gave it passionately to seek after that. The next two words, seek and search, are two separate meanings. The idea of seeking, he was definitely looking for and going after. The idea of searching, he was diving into the details, meaning he was experimenting. It wasn't that he was just trying to get information. Well, what do you learn about this? Now, I wouldn't practice that, but just tell me what you know. No. He said, not only did I seek it out, but I went in, I did it. I participated. That's where he went wrong. He started participating in things that he should have just read the notes on, or not even read the notes on. You understand, there's some things that we as Christians just need to say, you know what, that's not good for me to know. I don't need to know. You know, there's times where I've dealt with people and have got a group of others that were talking about scenarios and situations and counseling and stuff like that. And sometimes the questions would come, or sometimes the statement would come out, I was like, I wouldn't even think to do that. And you know, in that moment, you realize that sometimes we are still pure in some areas. Who would even think? Who would even have that under? Why would even somebody try that? It's because they allowed their heart to be sucked into something where those who don't participate in those things have guarded their heart and protected their heart from those things. And so sometimes people can't explain why they do things. They allow themselves to get sucked in. And I gave my heart to seek and to search out. Now notice he says by wisdom. Now I think at the beginning he might have had good intentions. And I realize by me saying this, I'm going up against the wisest man of the known world at that time. But when you read the rest of it, I think you'll side with me that I think he was using human wisdom and human logic, not spiritual wisdom in this search and seeking to know everything. Concerning all things that are done under heaven. And again, I underline in my Bible the all things. As I mentioned, there are just some things that we don't need to learn about. And notice what he says, though. This sore travail hath God given to the sons of man to be exercised therewith. Now he goes back. This same phrase, similar to it, is back in Genesis chapter number 3, that sore travail. You know what it was? After Adam and Eve were cursed with the curse, the ground was cursed, and they would sore travail, labor and sore travail for the rest of the days of life. And that was passed down to all of us. And he was saying that God gave me this job to search out and to seek out all things. I think if we ask God, God, did you really want him to go after these perversions? God would say, no, he knows better. But his heart was leading him more than the wisdom that God had given to him. Verse number 14, I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and behold, all is, say it with me, vanity and vexation of spirit. Now this is an interesting statement. I'm kind of get ahead of myself in my notes. So let me go back to my notes real quick. Verse number 13, I gave my heart to seek and to search out wisdom concerning all things. It reminds me of the old adage, how will you know if you don't like it if you don't try it? Anybody ever had somebody ask them that? Oh, you goody two-shoes. Oh, you holy Joe Christian. How do you know you're not going to like it unless you try it? Say, listen, I don't need to be hitting the head with a hammer to know if I like it or not, okay? There's just some things that are obvious. But growing up, we had friends that would try to get you to do what they were doing because they wanted someone else to feel guilty with. They wanted someone else to make them feel like they weren't so bad. They wanted someone else to participate in their immorality or what it was so they didn't feel like they were a loner in doing their sin. And some of us were stupid enough to go along with it. This is the same idea. We sometimes allow our heart, which is desperately wicked, to go along with things that our spiritual side would say, absolutely not. There's no need for me to participate in that thing. The danger of seeking with your heart instead of your head or your spirit that God has given to you results in emptiness and futility. The heart is deceived. The heart is desperately wicked. The heart can override true wisdom. Notice in verse number 16 what Solomon says about his heart. I communed with what? I commune with my own heart. As soon as I started studying this out, I just immediately started thinking, wait a minute. Psalms is full of verses that says I commune with God. Jesus wants to commune with you. The Spirit of God wants to commune. But when I start communing with my own heart, now it's what my desires are, what my passions are. And that's exactly what Solomon did. He started communing with his own heart instead of really seeking the wisdom of God. I commune with my own heart, saying, Lo, I am come to great estate. I have gotten more wisdom than all they that have been before me in Jerusalem. Yea, my heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And that's a true statement. He did. He filled his heart with all kinds of wisdom and knowledge. But I want you to know what it resulted in. Notice verse number 17. I gave my heart to know wisdom. And then the dramatic music change in the script here. and to know madness and folly. I gave my heart to know wisdom. Okay, if we stop there, we'd be all right. But I gave my heart also to know madness and folly. This is only used in Ecclesiastes. Nowhere else found in the Bible, this phrase together. And the idea of this madness and folly joined together here shows the excessiveness in which he went. It's the idea of extravagance of foolishness. Solomon so pursued after whatever he thought was extravagant in whether it was sinfulness or purity, he went after the experience foolishly. He just dove in. No thought of consequences, even though he was endued with great wisdom. In his mind, in his heart, because he allowed his heart to lead him, he allowed it to pull him astray and allowed himself, and I think we've all been there at times, to just shut out God, the convicting spirit, the conviction of the Holy Spirit. Okay, not now, and almost like we want to run into it without having to think about God, and I'll deal with that later, but I want to have my fun now. And Solomon went wholeheartedly after whatever he thought, and he rationalized. I'm the king. God gave me this ability. And God be sitting there saying, Solomon, not for sinful pleasures. The principles I gave you, the Deuteronomy principles, go back, look what I told you. There are certain things you're not supposed to do as king. I would never give you permission to do those things, Solomon, but you let your heart get the best of you. And Solomon pursued after these things with his heart. Let me just read you a couple excerpts from an article that I found in a little research I was doing. I have another one for tonight. This article is titled, it's from a blog, a gentleman by the name Gleb Sipersky. Say that 10 times fast. Searching for meaning and purpose in life, with a question mark, and then it says, religion is optional. Imagine the following scenario. You have been raised in a deeply evangelical household. From an early age, your parents taught you to pray daily and told you that the purpose and meaning of life were found in God. Attending Sunday school reinforced these messages. So did the television your family watched, the books that they gave you to read, the music which they encouraged you to listen to. You grew up in this environment throughout your early teenage years, attending a religious elementary school, junior high school. Then you went off to your local high school because your parents could not afford a religious high school. There you met an environment that challenged your belief and purpose and meaning in life were to be found only in God. They challenged your belief that the meaning of life was found only in God. You started to question and doubt. Maybe even attended meetings of the local affiliate of the Secular Student Alliance to find out what it is all about. You wanted to explore more broadly, but were afraid of losing your sense of purpose and meaning in life. This is the story of many students that I have taught in my role as professor, as well as for those who have come to the Intentional Insights, that's the name of his group, presentations, finding meaning and purpose in life. They were deeply confused about the meaning and purpose of life, questioning what it's all about. They are wise to do so. As research shows, having a clear answer to the question of life and meaning and purpose can greatly improve your mental well-being. The questioning correlates with the growing number of nuns. This is a term now used for a generation of people that don't ascribe to any religious background, even though they may have grown up in church. They say, we're the nuns. We don't claim any type of religion. We don't claim any type of attachment to organized religion. They're called the nuns today. N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N. That's what I had growing up. Many nuns of the young people in general are seeking for answers that don't necessarily include God as part of the equation. Recently, several books have explored the possibility of having life meaning and purpose or sense of spirituality without God as part of the public conversation. So what does the research on this issue show? Apparently, the important thing is simply to gain a sense of life and purpose meaning. The source of the purpose itself is not so important. And there's more to this article. If you want to go online, read it, you can do so. But I read that to you only because this is just one of so many that is drawing attention to the fact that sometimes children, even growing up in good Christian environments, somewhere have a disconnect between what was really taught. Sometimes they've just gone through the motion because they love mom and dad, and they just do it because mom and dad told them this is what you do. And they get to a place, maybe it's sometimes even in Christian school, sometimes in public school, sometimes homeschool, sometimes by the entertainment, by whatever's out there, by friends. Now that they have friends online, you don't even know what country they're living in sometimes, that are influencing and bombarding them with all kinds of information, getting them to question what they believe. And listen, you're not going to fight this in the sense of just causing it to go away. The only thing that you can do is educate your children properly and ask questions with them to say, now, why do we believe this? And this is something I've been a proponent of for years. I've done it with my own kids. We've exposed them to things out in the real world and said, okay, what decision would we make? Why? What principles guide us as a family? Why do we not do certain things that even your friends do? Why do we not allow you guys to do that? And we've had them to think through these things so they had a good grasp and understanding. And it doesn't mean the curiosity is not there. It doesn't mean the desire is not there. But we have guidelines. We have parameters. We have principles that we live our lives by so we would try to live a life that would bring honor and glory to our God. And so from this article, we just note that people are searching for meaning, though, without God. And this is the problem that even Solomon faced. You would say, wait a minute. He was made king by God. He was endued with wisdom by God. He was the king of the nation of God. Of course Solomon knew God, loved God. No, his heart. Remember last week in the introduction, at first we read in 1 Kings chapter number 3 that he loved God with his what? Heart. Then we go to chapter 11, he loved strange women with all his heart. He changed. As we have the danger of changing as well, folks. We're no better. We're no different. It may not be the immorality, perhaps it's in our world. It could be something else that is taking your heart away from serving God, taking your heart away from making God number one in your life. But this, for Solomon, became a search for madness and folly. The result of this, look back in our text, verse number 17, chapter 1. And I gave my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is vexation of spirit. Again, this phrase, exclusive for Solomon, the idea of true emptiness. The idea of vexation here of spirit means trying to grab the wind. This is what he says. It's unattainable. Every time I searched for this, every time I wanted to find pleasure in this thing, wherever it was, it's just, I can't hang on to it. It's unattainable. It'll be so quickly gone, and I wanted another experience. And the danger with those experiences, you have to keep upping it. Tonight's lesson is going to talk more about that. What he had to add to his life of pleasure in order to bring more satisfaction. And he talks very clearly about it. And it's something that sadly many of you perhaps have experienced in your own life. So the result was emptiness. What he says in verse number 18, notice this, and I think this is a key. Because he did seek after so much knowledge by experience. Verse 18, for in much wisdom is much what? Grief. And he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. And I think that's true to a point. Most of us want to keep our kids innocent of certain things for a certain time. We try to keep our kids, and I'm not just talking about immoral stuff, just life experiences. You know, there's some things, it's just better for you not know about it yet. Wait till you come of age. Wait till you get a certain place. Wait till you're at a certain point in your life, and you just don't want to know those negatives. But sometimes they find out, and then you have to sit down and you talk to them and explain things. And I remember I was 9 years old, first funeral that I remember going to. My Uncle Emil, alcoholic, pickled himself. I remember sitting there just looking at this long casket and this gaunt-looking man in this casket, and we walked up to the casket and I just stared at him and kind of freaked out as a 9-year-old kid, first time ever to a funeral service like that, but just looking at him and knowing about him, not really knowing him that well, but just kind of striking me. And my mom kept saying, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" You know, and I didn't know what to answer, but then that, in my mind, that picture just come back over and over again, and then asking, well, why did he die? Why did he die? And then having to clarify, well, why did he die? I don't understand. Why did he die? A young kid trying to come to grips with death. And it was just something I remember vividly as a young kid. And sometimes we try to protect our kids, but that, for a 9-year-old kid, started me thinking about life and death. 9-year-old kid. Realizing, okay, we're not living forever. And so there are some things that we're exposed to that kind of get us to question things. But I want you to notice Solomon fell to Satan's lie that was brought up in the Garden of Eden. Genesis 3, 5, and 6. He fell prey to the same thing. For God doth know in the day that ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit. May I say it again? You'll hear me say it again. Listen, if you're a teenager in here, if you're 20-something, doesn't matter what your age is, there are some things we just don't need to have wisdom about in the sense of knowledge. There's some things you could just say, I've heard about it, I don't need to know the details. There's just some things that are not worth it. Don't be a fool like Solomon was. Said a fool? Yeah, a fool. He acted the fool. He went after it. He said he went after madness and folly. He played the fool, thinking he was wise. And it caught up to him, and he said everything is like trying to grab the wind. It's just impossible. There's no satisfaction in it. So the conclusion, aren't you glad this is only half the message? Yeah, wow. I'll stop. Let me just give you this and help you to understand that one of the mistakes that we make even in our culture, this article that I read to you, I think all of it can be kind of summarized in this. When you think about, as I mentioned at the beginning, what is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of life? What brings fulfillment? Here's the question you're going to ask yourself, and I'll continue this tonight for the sake of time. Who created you? That one truth should cause every one of us to go back and say, if I was then created by God, which we believe, what does He want for my life? We'll pick that up here tonight. Father,